to order.
Sound.
Oh, thank you, Monsieur.
Today we have extra, so I
Thank you.
can't
Good
always do
morning.
that, but today I can.
This is the July meeting of the Maine Citizen Trade Policy Commission. My name is Sharon Treat. I'm the House Chair of the committee, or co-chair of the committee. The Senate Chair is Senator Troy Jackson, who was unable to be with us today. We have a very interesting agenda today. I thought before we get going with that, we'll introduce ourselves, starting to my right. And I know we have a new member as well, so you can give us a little more background than usual when we get to you. So,
Hi, I'm Bob Humphrey, President of Northeast Packaging up in Presque Isle.
Good morning, I'm Roger Sherman, Senate District 34, southern half of Aroostook County, and no, I did not drive down here this morning. I drove from Portland, where I bummed a night with my brother-in-law.
And good morning, I'm State Senator John Patrick from Rumford. I represent Senate District 14, which has encompassed 30 towns and townships in western and northern Oxford County and the town of Jay in Franklin County.
Hi, I'm Pamela Taylor. I'm the Bureau Director for the Bureau of Labor Standards, Maine Department of Labor.
Good morning, I'm Steve Cole from the Community Development Corporation, CEI, representing small business.
and I just want to welcome Pamela Taylor to the commission. There's a lot of lingo and stuff to get into here, so there's no question that is, really, there's no question that is a foolish or stupid or uninformed question, because we're all learning every day on this issue, and it's very complex. So we're particularly glad to have you here. And we are missing some people. I know some of the legislators, Representative Ayotte also was unable to be down here today. So maybe a couple more will filter in. So we're going to start off first with Kathie Leonard. And Locke, do you want to just introduce yourself and also give an intro?
There we go. I'm Locke Kiermaier, staff for the Citizen Trade Policy Commission, and I'm pleased to welcome and introduce Kathie Leonard, who is the president of Auburn Manufacturing. I think it's fair to say you have her resume there, and a description of what Auburn Manufacturing is all about. I think it's fair to say that she's one of the leaders in the business community in Maine. She's also a member of the USTR in a form I think similar to Representative Treat, and was highly recommended to the commission as somebody that is knowledgeable both about conducting business in Maine in terms of international trade, somebody that's very involved in that, and somebody who is somewhat familiar with the USTR as well. So I think the commission is very fortunate to have somebody like Kathie come speak, and I'd like to welcome her.
Very good. Can I just check on, oh, good, it looks like it's now working. And I just wanted to very briefly mention that we've been joined by Linda Pisner from the Office of the Attorney General. Welcome.
Very good. So you can hear me through this mic fine? Okay.
Just for new people and for yourself, so you know, this is actually streamed over the internet, so anyone who might be listening over the internet can hear every word we say. So just so you know that.
Very good.
You're welcome.
So my name is Kathie Leonard. I thank you very much, Locke. It's good to be here. I first met Sharon Treat in February at a Maine International Trade Commission legislative briefing here in Augusta. And in talking, we realized we were both on different ITAC committees. ITAC is International Trade Advisory Commission, or committees, which is part of the Department of Commerce. And so she thinks that maybe we're the only two people in Maine that are on these committees. Maybe we are. I don't know what that says about us. But so she said, gee, I'd love to have you come and speak to our committee. I was somewhat reluctant to do that because unlike Locke's introduction, I don't consider myself a real expert. I'm just a business person trying to survive through a lot of turmoil in our trade policy. And so, I've become involved only because I have to try and stay competitive in the marketplace. So when Locke, I won't say hounded, but he was persistent about me coming to speak to you, and when he finally said, "Look, we're going to pick a date when you can come, and we'll have the meeting," and there's no way to get out from under that. So here I am, and it's good to be here. I'm glad that he did, because it makes me form my thoughts a little better too, and think about why am I doing what I'm doing, and what do I have to bring to you. I think, have an interesting perspective, which I want to share with you as a manufacturer. And then in doing my homework, looking at what this committee has been up to, it was formed in 2003, and when I was approached to speak, I thought, well, they really need help. They're a new committee. You're 10 years old, and I'm just now getting asked. So, I guess I don't feel quite as flattered now. It took 10 years. What took you so long? And then as I looked through the membership, I thought, Maine is a small town, isn't it? I know Bob Humphrey through my work with AMTAC, which is an American Manufacturers Trade Action Advisory Committee down in Washington, a lobbying group. He's a businessman as well and has a strong legislative background. I also saw that Wade Merritt from Maine International Trade Commission is on your committee. Very good guy, has helped us in going to trade missions and so forth. So there's a lot of people that I know. I also saw that the speakers you've had over the years are people I know, like Sarah Bigney with the Fair Trade Coalition. I've been part of some of her presentations to legislators to try and get the word out about American manufacturers, as well as Nora Todd, who is a wonderful, she's a staffer with Congressman Michu's office. She has been tremendously helpful to us in linking up with the proper people to make our views known in Washington. She's been very, very helpful, and we stay in touch very often about what's going on. So the background on Auburn Manufacturing: we are a textile manufacturing company. Yes, there is still manufacturing and in the state of Maine in textiles. We employ 50 people. We're located both in Mechanic Falls and Auburn. In fact, we are doing an expansion project right now. We're adding 22,500 square feet to our Auburn plant, which is a 30% increase in our square footage. So we are a committed manufacturer in the state of Maine. We are located only in the state of Maine. We are U.S. producers. We use domestically produced materials to make our products wherever possible. There's only a couple of items that we can't get in the United States. So I'd say 95% of our materials are U.S. made. The ratio of jobs, by the way, we employ 50 people, but the textile industry states that we support an extra 3 jobs. So it's for every textile job, that's 3 jobs that we support. So that's 150 people in the state of Maine. We are a business that uses a lot of raw material. That's the biggest portion of our cost. We use a lot of energy in making our products, natural gas, electricity, and we are a capital-intensive industry. We have a lot of equipment. So that's all right. I'm used to that. And these fabrics are this is not your typical textile operation. We're not a cut and sew operation. We are a company that actually weaves products. We chemically treat them, we coat them, we do a lot of processes to them to make them heat and fire resistant. I am the co-owner, co-founder of the company, and I'm 100% owner at this point. I had a partner for 20 years, and I bought out his interest in 2000. So I've been sort of on my own, along with a great team of people, since 2000. Like I say, we make these specialty textile products that were originally designed to replace asbestos. So anywhere there was high heat is where there was a need for substitutes when asbestos got banned in the 1970s. There's a lot of these materials used, as you might guess, in heavy industry such as shipbuilding, The Navy, as you know, that was part of the problem with the asbestos. It was used in onboard ships as insulation, for one thing. Well, all those materials had to be replaced and substituted. So our materials do the same things that asbestos textiles do, but without causing cancer. And they are very heavy-duty fabrics. They're fireproof. They're primarily fiberglass, or they call it silica-based products. That's so it's based from sand. Basically, the raw materials are melted sand and then purified in some way and then formed into textile forms. However, we also use aramid fibers, which are other petroleum-based fibers like Nomex, Kevlar, some of those products that you've heard of. They're derivatives of nylon. Plus, we use silicone coatings, other high-temperature coatings to enhance the performance and the durability of our products. The products are used in shipbuilding as insulation. They're also used in the refining industry. They're used in the power generation industry, all in what we call maintenance, repair, and operations applications. That's MRO applications, where the products are used and they're used up, and then they have to replace them. So also in shipbuilding and refining and all these heavy industries, steel industry and so forth, a lot of times our stuff comes in contact with torches for hot work, molten metals in steel making, aluminum making, and so forth. So they're used to destruction and then they're replaced. So it's very much a repeat business. And they're sold, the fabrics are sold in roll form. They're not cut and sewn into. Some of the products are cut and sewn into garments, but most of it's used as you would call, it looks very unsophisticated. It's a drop cloth, only it's fireproof. So it's it is sophisticated in its makeup. The fabrics that we make to meet military specifications represents, or our government business represents, about 10% of our overall business. So we sell directly to the Department of Defense, and specifically to the U.S. Navy and to Navy yards. 25% of our sales are export. Canada is our largest trading partner, but we sell to over 30 other countries around the world. And these are countries that also have wanted to replace asbestos. The rest of the world was a little slower to adopt to non-asbestos textiles. It took them quite a while. And some countries weren't as industrialized as the U.S. and the U.K. and Europe and so forth. So the Europe and U.S. kind of started this movement. I think NAFTA, I'm not an anti-NAFTA person in that I think we've benefited from NAFTA selling to Canada. It's just made it very easy to ship across our borders. Mexico, we didn't really notice any benefit from NAFTA until recently. We're starting to see the Mexican economy pick up, and they're more interested in buying from the U.S. because we're right next door. And there's a lot of American companies that are reshoring, so to speak, from China, but maybe not back to the U.S. They're going to Mexico because that's another low labor cost country. But those companies such as Kimberly-Clark, Procter & Gamble, and so forth want American-made products, especially when it comes to safety standards. They want to meet the same standards they have to meet in the U.S. So they're forcing that into their economy, and so we're seeing an uptick there. So let me explain our interest in trade policy as a company. I'd like, for the first 10, 15, almost 20 years, I think we just kind of cruised through and everybody loved us and we had no offshore competition in the U.S. and life was good. And we grew 30 to 40% a year. It was wonderful. But in the 90s, things started to change. And as it happens with any maturing market, I understand that. That's part of business. But in the 1990s, we began seeing a real upsurge of fabrics, especially the ones developed for our military, coming in from Eastern Europe, and that's specifically from Latvia and Belarus. These two countries were where the textiles made for their military, for Russia's military complex, were made. And because they were centralized governments, there were tens of thousands of people that worked in these plants. And so they're major employers in these countries. And so when the Russian military complex dismantled a bit, they had nowhere to sell these products. And because they were still somewhat centralized, they started dumping them, for lack of a better term, into the U.S. And we found that the U.S. government kind of turned its head the other way because, after all, the Cold War was over. What's a few hundred textile jobs in the U.S. or thousands of textile jobs? They just didn't think it was that important. And our economy was going forward anyway. This was the early 90s, and we're working more towards becoming a service-based economy. So that's what we found out then. It was a little disturbing, sort of a wake-up call to us that, you know, our government didn't necessarily care much about who we were and what we were offering. In the early 2000s, we started seeing even more materials coming in, especially to the U.S. military. It happened, the first thing we saw was that an RFQ that came out from the U.S. Navy, the specification had been changed and it lowered the required silica content in the fabric, which I knew meant it opened the door to the Belarusian product because our products were 96% silica and they lowered it to 93%. Who cares about a lousy 3%? But that meant the Belarusian product could be quoted. Now, that would also call up whether or not, it would bring into question whether or not these products should be U.S. made. Well, those contracts do say the product has to be U.S. made. But, and they're supposed to be 100% U.S. made. They're supposed to be, you know, I don't know if you've heard of the Berry Amendment, but you've probably heard about it more recently because New Balance has been involved in this. But the Berry Amendment is part of the purchasing in the military that says products for the military, textile products, must be 100% domestically sourced. That's from yarn forward, so to speak, or fiber forward in this case. And we had always done that. And like I said, this is only 10% of our business. It's not like my company only lives off government contracts. This is a smaller part of our business, but it is substantial. These are multi-year contracts that were going to be affected. And we had to go and get in touch with the director of purchasing at the Navy and talk to them, and had to go through a lot of machinations to get them to understand what they were doing, and they retracted it. And we did get that contract, which was rightly so. We were the low bidder. But then we began also seeing that that maintenance, repair, and operation contracts were also being pulled out of the general solicitations that come out to everyone. They weren't being publicly announced. They were going through specific prime contractors that the government, that specifically Navy yards, were contracting directly with these prime contractors like SAIC, for one. Okay, that's one of the 10 largest contractors in the U.S. They do all sorts of engineering work, but they also supply these MRO contracts. Well, it turns out that an MRO contract can include products like ours, and even though it says U.S. made, there's no transparency in those contracts. There's privity of contract is what's important about these, or one of the factors. We found out the hard way by having to contact our senators and our representatives in Washington to find out what was going on, why we weren't getting these contracts. We lost over $500,000 worth of business doing this. And so we became very vocal on that front and did whatever we could. We never did totally resolve it. We filed for Freedom of Information Act information. The meat of it was redacted because we were told that would not be a competitive thing to do. They shouldn't tell us who they bought from because it could harm. It would be trade secrets of some sort. So, we were locked out of that one. However, we've seen a change miraculously. The shipyard that was in question has begun ordering from us a little more now. Then in 2008, Belarus, you may know this, was sanctioned by the U.S. State Department and Treasury because it is a centralized government run by Lukashenko, who was putting people in jail when he lost, if he lost an election, he just, people were, if they dissented, they were put in jail. And State Department in the U.S. was tired of it, and they finally just, told him he couldn't do that anymore. Well, Lukashenko actually owns that textile company in Belarus that competes with us. So that company was actually named in the sanction that came out of Treasury. And so we saw an uptick of business in the United States that kind of was scary. We didn't realize we had been losing so much business to Belarus. And the reason is because a lot of those products didn't come, they're coming through U.S. companies, okay? They're not, Belarus doesn't set up shop in the United States as a company or the specific company. They go through American entrepreneurs, and this is where we're losing jobs in this country, because this is happening in a lot of industries in the United States where there's a few guys, people that get together from a specific, they might have been early retirees from a company that competed with somebody in our business. And then they set up shop, they bring in the materials from offshore, and then they sell it as their own. They take the labels off, they put their name on it, and it's now a U.S. company. And you go to their website, they look just like us. One of my competitors looks just like us. It's got the flame in the logo, it's got a picture of the plant. Come to find out, there's like 3 employees, and it's a warehouse. And that's what they're doing. And what we found out most recently, and I'm going to hand you this one out, because this is, you can't believe this. This is just, what we're seeing is that fabrics are being, we believe from this email that we were given by a third party, that products from Belarus, because they've been sanctioned, and so we can't import directly, they're coming through Canada now. And so I don't know if you folks have talked about transshipment as an issue. That hasn't been talked about? Okay, because I think that's the new hot button, one of the new terms that at least Customs and Border Protection is very, very interested in, is transshipment. And it's probably, and I was glad to hear it's not just my business or my industry, because nothing's going to happen if it's just us. It's got to be, widespread. But what you'll see there is part of an email. I redacted the names, but at least you're going to see that this is an Australian export-import guy writing to a business person in the U.S. offering them products from Belarus through Canada. The products are coming into Montreal. All the labels are coming off in Montreal. All the even the pallet designations are coming off. The materials then come into the U.S. as if they're coming from Canada. And then they can go anywhere from there, okay, as U.S. product. And this is actually truly against the law. This is a violation of the sanctions. So my part in this is to have blown the whistle on it. I found out from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, I know that was on your agenda today. I've gotten to know those folks fairly well over the last few months, and they're pretty helpful, and they actually have on their website, they have what they call an e-allegation button you can push and file an allegation, okay? You can do it anonymously, or you can do it with your company name. We went ahead and put our name on it, but I've passed this information along to them, made that case. They have 30 days to respond to you, and then they'll start investigating. And so that's where that is. I also blew the whistle on another situation where we found that Chinese textiles are coming into the United States through 2 companies, one on the West Coast, and then the material is then sold, I guess, invoiced, I suppose, or I think it's sold to another company on the East Coast, who then takes all the labels off again and sells these products as U.S. made. They claim that their material, by the time they finish processing it, I don't know what they're doing to it because it's sold in roll goods, but it's at least Buy American. It comes under the Buy American Act because they say it's 51% value is U.S., okay? Now, the reason I found that out is because I was in Mexico at a trade show and found out that two of my customers are buying specific products from this U.S. company. And I said, and they're buying them at 30% below my price, okay? And I'm not getting rich over these products. This isn't like, we're not, inflating our prices that much. And I said, well, you realize these are Chinese textiles, don't you? And they said, oh, no, they're U.S. And I said, there's no documentation on them. It doesn't say made in China. And they said, no. And I said, well, what about the documentation when it's imported from the U.S. Into Mexico? No. Country of origin says U.S. So we've reported that as well. So this is you know, I bring these two examples to you because this is our world, okay? This is outside of, you know, trade policy. You know, it's when we talk about trade agreements, free trade agreements sound wonderful. And if all I had to worry about was losing an 8% duty, you know, on a product, because that's really what we're talking about, a lot of these free trade agreements. It's not a lot of money on just that, but it's what's going on that's not being enforced, and that's where the real problem is. And so my activity in Washington, anywhere I can say that, I'm going to say it. I belong to trade. It was the American Manufacturing Trade Action Committee, and now it's part of the National Consortium of Textile Organizations. I also belong to the ITAC. I do talk about when we're being lobbied by Commerce Department, basically on free trade agreements, on the benefits of free trade agreements for Korea and so forth. I try and counter with, well, remember, there's a downside to these. You know, if we don't have our house in order, you're just adding more and more situations, more countries that are going to be doing the same things that some of these other countries are doing. Now, if they're not a centralized government, maybe it won't happen so much, because the real problem is the currency manipulation and the subsidies. I don't get either one of those advantages, and you're talking 40 to 50%. You know, it's not 8%. That's not. I can compete with an 8% advantage for another country, but not a 40% advantage, and that's what's happening. And so that's our goal is to. One of the things I'm trying to raise awareness about is country of origin labeling. Customs and Border Protection tells me that label that says made in China, made in Belarus, made in Latvia, whatever, has to be on that product until it reaches the end user. Now, if that end user is a cut and sew operation, fine, okay, it can come off there. But if it's being sold as a roll good to a refinery and it's going out on a job site, it should be on there, okay? That's what they contend, and we're not seeing that. Buy American and Berry Amendment enforcement in our government purchasing. You know, since the what do you call it? We've called it so many things. The government, you know, since 2008 or 2009, when we started government purchasing in a big way, there was Buy American instituted for materials on all these jobs like bridge building and so forth. And that was a good thing. It really has helped. It's helped a lot of people seek companies like mine out to say, we need American products, can you certify that? So my company has been proactive and developed a label that is a country of origin certificate that we're putting with our quotes and so forth, so that we're raising the bar on awareness and transparency so that a competitor would have to perhaps do the same thing. We're hoping we can get that through. And then, of course, with the Berry Amendment, I'm active in groups related to the textile industry who are lobbying in Washington to maintain the Berry Amendment. And Berry Amendment isn't just about, it's not protectionism in terms of we don't want anybody to compete with us. It also involves safety issues. I mean, when you're talking about camouflage fabrics, they have to be a certain way. Fire retardant products. We've had situations where some of these military operations were buying imports that failed, and then we got called after they failed. Well, and you've read articles about electronics being, counterfeit electronics getting into our products. Is it really, the government, I think, the federal government in the last decade has thought more like they're trying to be Walmart, buy cheap and who cares, who cares about country of origin? And it really has hurt our economy, and I think it's cost us more than we've gained by it. And then, of course, transshipment in the U.S., I think, is the biggest. These are the issues. So with that, I open it up to any questions you might have. off base on what you were
No.
looking for? Tell me.
No,
You know?
this is amazing. It's just so, I think a lot of what we hear is in the abstract, in general policy, and it's really hard to relate it to a specific business or to understand exactly what it means for people in Maine. So this is really, really helpful, and it also perhaps opens up some opportunities for us to perhaps get involved in these series of issues. So I guess I would open it up to members of the commission to see if anyone has any questions for Kathie Leonard to start with.
I don't know if you want to fill this out too. I have another handout, by the way. It was just written, I sent it to Sharon already, but it was just last week, and it's on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but on the top of the second page, it does have the yarn forward definition, which is very helpful, I think, in understanding why textile companies are concerned about any free trade agreements that don't include yarn forward, especially when it comes to countries like Vietnam.
And just, do you have an understanding right now?
Yeah,
about whether or not-
basically, whether or
what
not,
can you give us a quick definition of what yarn?
well,
Oh, okay,
I don't
it's
have it
written
in
down.
front of me, but yarn
But-
forward basically means that if there's, let's say there's a company in Vietnam that wants to make apparel for the United States, yarn forward would require that for them to sell to us duty-free, they would have to make the yarn in Vietnam, not simply import it from China, which is what they're doing. China is putting these materials through Vietnam. Vietnam's a cheaper cut and sew operation, and it's where the cheap labor is. So there isn't really the value add. It's only those jobs that are being, improved in Vietnam. And that really hurts us because then they can dump their fabrics right through Vietnam, and it's a pull-through into the U.S. And plus, remember that manufacturers of textiles in China, they're not just more efficient. Sure, they have great equipment now because they're centralized. Their government subsidizes those purchases of equipment while we're using used stuff. But they also pay those manufacturers when they export. They get a rebate. And it is my understanding that those folks make their money off the rebate. They don't have to make money off their operation, so they can run a zero profitability company and just make their, whatever it is, 20% when they export. We get none of that.
Question, Senator Sherman.
Thank you for being here. This is putting a face on what a lot of us has thought all along. Just a question, how do you talk about things coming through Canada, and you say Canada has been somewhat helpful. I'm trying to think of it, where did it become helpful, at the border itself, or what they committed the country?
I'm just saying, from a zero tariff position, NAFTA has been helpful to us, okay, so that we sell into Canada without any duty.
Well, I'm thinking stuff that comes in the United States
has-
mislabeled, so I gotta have someone hop on a truck
Right.
someplace and say what paperwork, is it a paperwork issue, or is it going further back than the paperwork?
I think Customs and Border Protection is going to have to look into it. I only know what I'm hearing is that these materials, Canada does not have a sanction against Belarus, for instance, so they can bring in Belarusian fabrics. If they choose to turn around, if some folks want to turn around and take the labels off those pallets and off the product and then ship them into the United States, no one's asking any questions. That's what I see the problem as. And I don't know that the Canadian government, I'm sure they don't know that that's what's going on. How would they know?
Yeah, it's something we're all gonna ponder.
Yeah.
Bob?
Kathie, I really commend you for hanging in there through all of this. Sometimes I know what you're going through, but could you comment a little bit on, this has been ongoing in the state for years. I know in the past we've talked about Ukraine and Czech Republic, and basically put some old line Maine companies like Carleton Woolen Mills in Winthrop out of business 20 years ago. The same thing, where you basically had a non-market economy shipping into the United States way below the cost of production.
Right.
Just because they wanted hard dollars.
Right.
But I guess we're still dealing with non-market economies in the case of Vietnam. And I think one of the flaws here, and if you can comment on this, was when the GATT was originally organized after World War II, it was basically to organize the free world, the free economies of the world against the Soviet bloc. And it appears that's all broken down now, that it's kind of a free-for-all. And they're still protected by, like you say, currency manipulation. They can set their currency at whatever level they want. They obviously don't care about their consumer base. So I guess I'm wondering where this is all going with Vietnam and the transshipment issue. I know they're seeing it now in woven fertilizer bags, for instance, where China has dumping orders against them, very high, like 300% in some ranges. And all of a sudden, this industry is mushrooming in Vietnam. And obviously they had no industry there at all before, so obviously these are Chinese companies that are just to circumvent the U.S. dumping law are moving their production to Vietnam. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that with lack of any intellectual property protections there.
I think these things have a life to them. If you live long enough, we're going to see this thing end, because what happens is, look at China. People want to make money. They're not going to work for nothing forever. And that's why the labor is going over to Vietnam. You know, they're just looking for the last cheap place on earth where they can make stuff for next to nothing. And Bangladesh. I mean, you look at all of those low-cost labor countries, and it can't last forever. But in the meantime, we're dropping like flies over here. So what can we do to, I understand that third world countries need to come up. We want them to come up. But there has to be some regulation on our part, some common sense applied to this. Like I say, we can't take a Walmart philosophy to it. It doesn't work. And we've seen it. We've lost 5 million manufacturing jobs in this country since early 2000. That's not just, textiles is one thing. We were already pretty well decimated in New England from textiles because everybody went to the Carolinas, but then those all went offshore. And so, now we're seeing that, oops, maybe that wasn't the right idea. Maybe we do need manufacturing in our country, because those jobs, our jobs, create more jobs than do service sector jobs. So even though people don't want to have a factory in their neighborhood, factories are good for our economy, and we're starting to see that. And it's good for the security of our country. So where's it going? I don't know. I'm not smart enough to figure that out. That's too strategic for me. I think I'm a good American. I'm a good American manufacturer. I want to see everybody succeed. But it's got to be a more level playing field, and I think our federal government, has to step up to the plate, and to the extent that you're writing letters to them to, any way that you can help Maine businesses in that way. I mean, like I said, with how many textile jobs are there in the state of Maine? I don't know what that number is. I saw it at one time. It's bigger than we thought, because we're so dispersed now, but. And if you attach a 3-to-1 ratio to it, how many jobs is it? It can be substantial enough to warrant a letter when these things occur to say, we need to protect these jobs.
Well, that's probably a good place for me to jump in with some questions. First, I wanted to recognize that we've been joined by Harry Wicker, who's a member of the commission. And I also wanted to mention that Chris Rector is here. Former Senator Chris Rector is here representing Senator Angus King.
Oh, wonderful.
And so he declined to address us yet. He said he's just listening in, but I think that part of the discussion here is about how can the commission, you're on one of the advisory committees, I'm on a different advisory committee. We've got the commission that does weigh in on things through letters, through resolutions, and potentially a meeting. One of the things that's we did is the chairs of the commission had contact Senator King's office, because Senator King said, well, I'm not voting for the new USTR Froman unless he comes to Maine and visits New Balance. Well, obviously, maybe he should be visiting Auburn Manufacturing and Harry Rickard's Orchard and a few other places.
Right.
And we tried to get in too and say, couldn't we have, perhaps a roundtable discussion with any members of the commission who could meet with him? I know that when Representative Kirk came the last time, he studiously avoided meeting with any members of the commission. In a previous visit, he did meet with commission members, and I believe that's how I got onto one of the advisory committees, is that Senator wrote, he finally said, well, what can I do to, make things better with, it was, I believe, somewhat contentious meeting, I wasn't at it. And they said, well, we keep nominating people to be on these, on the, advisory committees, and you haven't appointed anybody. And he said, well, I'll go do that. So the next thing I knew, I was being investigated by the FBI to see if I made the clearance level. So, it can make a difference even in those small ways. So we're waiting to see what's happening. We don't know. Do you have any update on that? No.
I don't, except I can tell you that the request is in
Yeah.
and being pursued by our staff in DC.
Right.
So inasmuch as they have some influence, we'll see what happens.
Well, you can see that, having a meeting directly with Kathie Leonard as well might be, because I think that the New Balance issue has been a big one with respect to Vietnam. But one of the things that's going on right now is now we're starting up negotiations with the European Union. I have no
Right.
idea if Belarus is in.
I think Latvia is,
Yeah, so see, that's a question I
but
would.
not Belarus.
Yeah.
I don't, but I'm not sure. I haven't gone that far with it either, I just try to keep hoping these things are
Well,
gonna slow down a little bit until,
They're not going
They
to
get their
slow
rules
down.
straight,
They're in fact starting up new negotiations on, in the week of July 8th. And they are actually initiating negotiations, and textiles are potentially going to be part of what is offered. Because I know I've been asked to supply comments on over 10 pages of text, which I cannot interpret. So this is the problem. And I think that from my perspective, and also just thinking about the commission, I think it'd be very helpful to get your help for us in thinking about how we can be effective. It strikes me, just going through some of what you've said, one of the big issues actually, which is not a secret issue, unlike the text, is enforcement of what's already on the books. And this transshipment issue strikes me as something that there is a new enforcement office that was set up in the USTR, and perhaps there are things that you could help us figure out what kinds of letters we might want to write or meetings we might want to have around that enforcement issue and how it affects your business and potentially other Maine businesses, that there's this work around the Buy American rules and the U.S. content rules that's being evaded. And if it's being evaded in your situation, it may well be evaded in other
Right.
businesses.
I'd be glad to. I know, I've been working with consultants, and there's a consultant right here in the state of Maine who's helped me with these issues, who's very, very knowledgeable, and I would say we should at least get her involved and talk to this group. I'll give you her name's Dana Eisness. I don't know if any
Oh,
of you know
Dana,
her.
yeah.
She's wonderful.
Yeah,
and-
she used to be chair of the commission, the Vermont trade, it was like kind of the parallel to the Maine International
Yeah.
Trade Center.
Yeah.
But it was the Vermont.
And she lives in Forest Island, so, and she's worked with me pretty closely on some of these issues. So she has good contacts and very, very good. So she knows my story.
Yeah.
She might know others, is what I think the point is to try and broaden, the message as much as possible. The other person is Augie Tantillo, the guy that headed up this AMTAC group out of Washington. He's just so eloquent and can explain what the textile industry is facing in the most understanding way. He worked for Strom Thurmond at one point. I mean, he goes way back, and he's just very eloquent and knowledgeable. He's a very good lobbyist in
And
Washington.
AMTAC, again, is.
Well, AMTAC was the American Manufacturers Trade Action Committee, which has been abolished because Roger Milliken was the funding agent of that, who worked in Maine, by the way.
Right.
You know, but he passed away, and so that group merged with this NCTO. You'll see it in my resume there, the name of that organization, which is just a conglomeration of all these textile organizations. They're now bonding together, and so we're all just going to be one happy family, regardless of what kind of
Size you are.
textiles we're, yeah. And so he's involved with that group. And so there's some good folks on that group and they are getting the message clearly stated. And I think that's what was wrong with the textile industry. Because we were so decimated, everybody just kind of went off and did their own thing for a while, and we didn't coalesce around some major issues and get our story straight and our talking points and so forth. And now we do have those in place. So to the extent I can be helpful, my problem is time. I've got a business to run. You know, I can't, all of these things take up time. Going to Washington for this ITAC is, you know how it is, you know, and the
Yeah.
amount of material that is sent in.
Well, just,
Yeah,
we have some more questions. Yes, Steve. Oh, sorry.
Actually, just to follow on your last comment, Kathie, I'm curious, as a CEO, how much time you're obligated to devote to trade
this?
issues?
I'm probably spending 20% of my time. Yeah, because it takes, I mean, you should see the folders. I only brought a subset of a subset with me.
Well, I see our folder, so I can
You
imagine
can
what your
imagine.
folders
You know, just my Berry Amendment is this big, my, you know, and I did want to mention anti-dumping legislation. That is another area where we could use some help. I understand that the cost has come down to take action against dumping. I've never even considered it because it was told to me that it was prohibitively expensive to take anti-dumping action. Like I said earlier, I find out that this American company selling Chinese product through 3 levels of distribution is selling at 30% below my price in another market. You know, or what, and I know they're selling these products for under market price in the United States. How can I take action against it? What can I do? You know, there should be a path that we might be able to take to make people show what they're doing to somebody so that we understand that it's not dumping.
Well, I mean, it seems to me we have some resources. Our commission has Locke Kiermaier. He's not spending even 20% of his time on this, I believe, but we have enough funding to continue his contract for, you know, another year or so. So, you know,
Yay.
we have some ability to kind of pull together resources, like getting Dana Eisnes here, for example, or perhaps seeing whether we could get help drafting up some letters on some of these things, or working. We also have Senator King's office, as well as Representative Misch's and the others. I mean, Nora Todd is a great resource, and I think that particularly on manufacturing issues, that is their kind of niche, where they are known throughout, you know, Congress as being the folks that are on top of that. So I think that there might be some potential to work between now, say, and the next meeting on some more specific actions that this commission could take if there was a general interest. There's a number of different issues, so you've been speaking towards the enforcement issue. I think I also heard from you on the just general there's enforcement of the rules that we have already.
Right.
And making sure they're not being evaded. And then there's what are the rules that we're going to have going forward. And those are still up in the air with respect to the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the European Union.
Right.
But those rules, as I said, they're on a secure website, ready for comment. And so they're not adopted yet, and there's still opportunity to weigh in. So if this commission were to understand it well enough to figure out a kind of a clear statement we wanted to make about things, the yarn forward rule, for example, which again, just to put it in a basic way, is really about how much local content does it need to have in order to be considered American made
And
have
again,
the preferences
the goal
of that.
is to prevent transshipment.
Right.
That's basically the same idea, because you don't want product to just go through one country and into another to avoid duty That's really what
Right.
what it's about.
So if it's
So
like
that's why.
5% American content,
Right,
how do you feel about that?
right.
So those are the, maybe 25, so that's that issue there, which is a separate issue that this commission could have a position on. I mean, I try to, I usually get 4 days to comment on complex stuff, and I try to pull something together by talking to someone that knows about it, sufficient to at least say, we've got textile industries, we would have concerns about a rule that does this, we would feel better about a rule that does that. I mean, that's pretty much,
Well,
what
and it
I
made-
can do.
when I mentioned earlier about getting in touch with the Textile Industry Association, it may be that you decide what industries are you really interested, what are the major industries in the state of Maine that you want to represent or to at least, address. Then you could get those statements from those industry people, even though I guess it's lobbying to some extent. That's your
Yeah.
decision on how you do that, but at least get up to speed on what their positions are, get their position papers, and then you can kind of derive from that what your position would be on those industries. Might be an easier way, because there's no way you're gonna know
Right,
everything
know all
about
that.
every single industry.
But there
takes
are
too
things
long.
that the commission could do in terms of taking a position on that. And the other thing I would just throw out there too is that every other year, the commission is supposed to do an assessment of how trade affects, this trade policy and trade affects the state. And so last year, or 2 years ago, I don't know.
It was 2012.
2012, so we're due to do it again in 2014. But in
Yeah, I read that.
2012, we focused on 3 issues: tobacco,
Yeah.
procurement, and pharmaceuticals. So, because we can't look at everything. So, and we have a limited budget, but it's enough to get, a consultant to focus on a couple issues. So we have another one coming up in 2014, so that's something just for the commission to think about. We could pick some
Which
other issues.
industries?
I mean, it could be enforcement, or it could be textiles, or it could be, Buy American, whatever. So, Senator Patrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Ms. Leonard, for bringing forward with your information, and it kind of, I hate the word free trade, I wish it was fair trade, because I think free actually, to me, is free to let anyone do whatever they want to circumvent the rules and regulations that we pass within the trade agreement. But what I'm wondering, and I do agree with Chairman Treat, the enforcement is important, but I'm wondering, and I've wondered all along, just how prevalent the cheating that goes on and stuff with your story of 1 or 2 things, knowing how all-encompassing these international trade agreements are and how entwined they are between agreement to the other one, there's more overlap and stuff like that, just how prevalent every issue is on every segment of the American economy and just how much is going on, because that has worried me all along from the start, is just, we don't have,
I know.
to me, we have agreements, but there's nothing there to ensure that they're being enforced or even
Right.
looked at or anything. So that's the biggest thing that scares me. Otherwise, then, every time we have an agreement, if you have something with one country to another that's not in one agreement, sooner or later, it's all gonna be
Right.
all encompassed
That's what
like
we're
a spider
seeing.
web.
That's what we're
And,
seeing.
So I'm just wondering how we could possibly, as a commission, possibly weigh into, with the president, the Congress, and everyone, what do we have on the books for enforcement of all the agreements, and is there any value to it? To me, there is, because it's like you say, I work in the paper industry, and it was a year and a half, 2 years ago, we had the gloss paper dumping from China, and we fought that
Right.
back, but they always said, well, what grade are they gonna circumvent the next time around, and how much money do we have before we all go bankrupt on those
Right.
stuff, so.
But we thank you very much for that, because your industry, as well as the steel industry, helped everybody a lot by, doing what you're doing, because, like I say, I can't afford to do it. Our industry is too small, so we can't stand up for ourselves. And so the general public never knows that this is happening. So how rampant is it? I think it's pretty rampant. One of the things that we've done in our research is gotten U.S. Department of Commerce data on how much is being imported into the U.S. under my HS codes, okay? And it's startling because you're seeing with regard to how much is coming in from Canada. Canada doesn't produce these products yet. We're importing a lot from Canada, so it does sort of get to, and other countries as well. So you're kind of like, wait a minute, how did that happen? How come there's all this stuff? But nobody ever does the research to put all these, to research all these HS codes. I mean, there's a ton of them, and not everybody uses the same HS codes for the same product. So we're finding that as well. So it's a web, you know, and it's difficult to find out. But that's why Customs and Border Protection needs to be involved. We need to ask the right questions of these folks, and they seem willing to delve into it. But if they don't hear from us, they don't know.
And the biggest problem I see with anything, if we do have any type of enforcement, what has been historically the last 10 or 15 years is you defund it and actually de facto gets rid of it.
Right.
Well,
on that bright
on a
note.
more positive note, I'm showing why I've been in office for 20 years. I obviously can't take no for an answer. I'm wondering if the story you told about the circumvention of the rules around with Belarus, and then also your concern about Latvia as well.
Right.
Do you have any of that written down in a form that perhaps could be attached to either comments that I submitted or comments or a letter that the
I do.
commission does? Because I think that if you did, rather than taking it from our notes, which
No, I
might not
do
be as
have it.
accurate, we could attach something like that and say, this is just one case example that we, you know, because we asked, we know about
In
this.
fact, I have a letter that we wrote to Secretary of Treasury about Belarus that might be helpful, you know, so that you see exactly what we've told them, and that was with the help of the
That would be
consultant,
very
so
helpful.
that it's
And I
in
see Chris
more
Rector
in
raising,
your language more
nodding
than
his head.
mine, you know.
Yeah, so what if, just looking around for kind of a discussion with the commission, what if we got that information from Kathie Leonard, as well as maybe work on having some more information from Dana Eisfis, perhaps, if we can pull together an August meeting. I don't know, August is sometimes challenging, but so is July. So, you know, to see where we might go with this in a future meeting in terms of pulling together some, you know, letter, information for a meeting that we might have if we end up having a meeting. And
Can I
Locke
ask
has
a
some
real-
suggestions.
or just,
Yeah.
actually, I'm gonna ask a real practical
Yeah.
question. How do you spell Dana Eisner's name?
EISDNESS.
Oh, I was only missing one letter.
I know, one consonant.
I'm
Iceness.
feeling very successful today.
And I can
And there
give
were
you
other
her-
contexts that.
I can supply those as well, and I think, you know, I'd be
Are
glad to
there-
do that, because the more people I can refer you to, maybe the less time I'm gonna spend
Sure.
personally, but trying to,
Well,
you know.
Because,
I've only
because
got so many
maybe
hours.
our staff could work a little bit with maybe the chairs of the commission and some of these, you know, contacts to boil this down into something that the commission could do in its next meeting in terms of taking some action on this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, action being, you know, either a letter, you know, we could do more about promoting what we do so that it actually makes it into the news and
I
gets
wondered
covered.
about that. In fact, all the work that we've done as a company, and the work that the folks that I've been involved with, and the work that you do, how to, you know, raising awareness so that a company like mine that hasn't had the time to put towards it might be able to say, oh, I can go to Customs
Right.
and Border Protection and go to this website and file this e-allegation. It only takes a few minutes. So if you see something, you know where to go to present it. You know, helpful hints, so to speak, would help a lot.
Well, and that's one, I mean, again, if we wanted to have a meeting that delved into the enforcement issue, there was established a new enforcement office at USTR. So perhaps we aren't
perfect.
always very successful at getting presentations and contacts, but we do have phone presentations from time to time from USTR, and that might be one where they would be willing to be, you know, on our agenda to explain how is it that a company in Maine could get something going.
Right.
You know,
Right.
we have a free taping here that gets posted somewhere. So, so there's a lot more that we could do, and maybe we could think and maybe get suggestions from commission members between now and the next meeting of if there's ideas about, what we could do on this. I don't know if there's any more right now. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for being here. This is fascinating, even as they're putting you out of business, I guess. The issue of Canada, we have a Maine Canadian ombudsman who's at a different level, just getting started. We've also met with, I call him the Ambassador Binns, I believe, out of Boston. He's stationed in Boston, has New England states that he works with. So maybe we could talk with some of those higher level groups. I know there's going to be some of us are going to Canada here sometime in August to deal more with some of the trade issues. The other thing, if I may, these things transshipping through Canada, none of this stuff stays there? I mean, I would think Canada itself would be.
Yeah, they might be buying it. I have no idea. I'm sure they have it's a good market for those products. So it maybe it's just an allegation. It's not a fact.
See, they're
I
one
can't
of our
prove
biggest trade partners.
I know that.
This is 35 million people they're kind of small, but big. Maybe we put up signs instead of stop the tar sands, we could stop the unlabeled stuff.
Well, and one suggestion too is to think about perhaps is advocating for some sort of reward system for finding these issues, I mean, we give people, the IRS has a reward system, why don't we have one in the Commerce Department for imports? Because I'll bet you would find out pretty quickly if it's rampant or not. Because really, I'm risking my business by doing what I'm doing. Their business is always negotiations here and there, and I maybe shoot myself in the foot, but with some of the stuff we're doing, but we just feel like it's the right thing to do, so we're coming forward. But not everybody wants to do that.
So, just a question, if I may, on your ITAC. Do you actually get text that is being proposed to review? Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I'm not the chair, and I don't stay involved in all of.
So you don't independently comment. It all goes through the chair of your ITAC.
Yeah. And like I say, we've got a very broad-based group because it's small and minority enterprises. So it's not just textiles. It's not just manufacturing.
So that's the one you're on. It's called.
It's the 11, which is. I think they've changed it. It used to be small and minority enterprises. Now it's small and medium enterprises. I don't know how, convenient. They changed the M to something else, And it does include, IP folks. There are some manufacturers, but we're not the biggest contingent in that group. And a lot of import-export folks. So. Again, it's the thrust is in our group is we want free trade agreements. We want to export, and of course that's what Commerce wants to do. So the thrust is to push for free trade agreements and get them out there so that we can make money. And
well, I just offered to you that there may be another way to get some of these state of Maine concerns. Expressed, because the one I'm on is the state level policy.
And what's the number of?
It's not a number. It's called the Intergovernmental Policy Advisory Council. The ITACs are all specifically representing businesses, and then there's a couple of cross-issue advisory commissions or committees, and I'm on the one that's called the Intergovernmental Policy Advisory Commission. And again, I would say 3/4 of the people on it are rah-rah, trade is good, and they don't get involved in any of the details. And then there's about 5 people that are really reading the text and saying, oh, this goes around the court system, maybe we should comment on this, or, oh, this has an impact on these factories in our states, maybe we should pay attention. So, but the fact is that we do get to comment specifically on proposed text. So, that's an opportunity where we have an expertise here.
To possibly be more vocal.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Great.
Okay, so is that an action plan? Anything we want to add to the action plan for the next meeting? Is everyone okay with that? Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you. This
much
was
for making the time.
very
We
good.
know it's very difficult. We really appreciate the business people, whether it's you or
Thanks.
Mr. Ricker or Mr.
You're very
Humphrey,
kind.
making time to be here.
Appreciate it.
Uh,
I'm going to leave a
it's very
few
helpful.
brochures here.
Okay.
I will just draw attention to the back. This is a brochure, we have a lot of brochures, but this one's specific to shipbuilding. And on the back, we do talk about the product being U.S. made, and we're not just an importer, and that our products are independently certified and manufactured, and to ask for a country of origin certificate. You know, we're just trying to, again, raise the bar so it might be of use. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
I'm sure we'll talk again.
Yeah.